The sewer under the lighthouse. You were always against moving away from your friends and family. You didn't want to leave the city. The coast never appealed to you anyway. You didn't want to move from a place with a population of 100,000 to one with a population of 5. It didn't matter as long as she was happy, and you were too. Why on earth did she think that a recently refurbished lighthouse on the other side of the goddamn country was a good idea? It took 5 hours to drive there, 5 hours to drive back. Not a single rest stop along the way. Why on earth was there a town here? There was no economy here. The nearest store was a 10-mile drive. The nearest hospital was even further. It seemed like you would be stuck here for a foreseeable future, stuck with the dreary weather, stuck with the biting cold, or stuck with her at least. Days dribbled by, the nights were cold, the mornings were crisp, the nights slipped away beneath the tide. However, despite your complaining, she seemed happy. How? You never figured out why. Boredom eventually won, though. You began exploring the town, anything to break away from your job of staring at that gray laptop all day. A bakery, a homemade antique store, a bar which also doubled up as a barber's, and an abandoned farm in the outskirts of town. All that was left of it was a burned down barn with a stone wall. When you passed through the farm on that misty afternoon, you peered into the well. You questioned why you did that, whether it was curiosity or that adventurous spirit you once had. You just couldn't tell. A broken ladder led into the dry depths, a torn rope dangled pathetically, tied to the top rung. When boredom won and its victory was but a smoldering ember, insanity drew ever closer. You decided to search the confines of your new house, searching every floor, even pondering if you could get the old beacon atop the tower working. This is when you found the trapdoor under the worn black and red diamond rug. Purely by accident. You showed her, asking her where she thought it led, but she didn't care. She told you to shut it and put the rug back. You listened to her, of course. Why wouldn't you? There's probably nothing in the cellar except the rats. Rats. That's what were crawling in and out of your mind. The thoughts, the questions, the urge, the drive, the curiosity. What was hiding down there? It took an incredible, hurtful argument on a cold night for you to explore what lurked beneath the lighthouse's foundations. After she got to bed, you crept downstairs with a handheld candle. Moving the rug, you opened the trap door with a terribly long groaning coming from the hinges, but you didn't care. Slowly you descended into the abyss. The dim fire in your hand was barely enough. It was in the cellar. This was an entrance to a small network, a network of a sewer system. So that what the smell was. The lighthouse was connected to the rest of the town through their toilets and sinks. Why on earth was there a sewer under the lighthouse? About the foul vapors, you proceeded along the dark corridor, careful to avoid the raw, viscous sewage flowing through the center. From this main corridor, several other branching corridors connected to it, all leading to the different houses that were within walking distance from the lighthouse. You didn't feel like becoming a peeping Tom, so you ignored the other corridors that led to the villagers' bathrooms, and went to see where this ended. Surely it led to the coast. After what felt like ages, you finally reached the base of the farm as well. Smith, this is where your lighthouse's basement led to. It had been bone dry for centuries. Skeletons of small animals were scattered around the entire circumference of the well. Holding the candle forward, you noticed that in the opposite corner, the other half of the rope was lying in a curled position, half eaten. Poor creatures. Well, at least your curiosity was satisfied. How long had you been walking to get here anyway? An hour at most. The corridor didn't extend more than 50 meters in any one direction. Strange, you thought yourself, holding the candle outwards to get one last look at the bottom of the well. You hadn't gotten used to the sickly sweet smell yet, and it felt quite ill. It was most likely time to turn back. She was already angry at you, and now she would be damn right wrathful. You turned around, but just as you did, the candlelight was extinguished. Damn, you really didn't want to fumble back home through a sewer in the pitch black darkness. But thankfully your smartphone never left your trousers' right hand pocket. The torch's white light fully illuminated the journey. You began trudging back, carefully avoiding the sludge you weren't able to see last time. Why on earth did a small town such as this with less than 5 buildings have such an impressive sewage system? You had imagined before coming here that you'd all have to shit in a latrine, letting the sea do the work for you. Smartphone's powerful torch illuminated all parts of the main corridor, shadows dancing at the entrance to the other corridors that led to the villagers' homes. You wondered if even the villagers knew this subterranean network existed. A large but relatively skinny rat appeared from a hole in the wall, splashing through the sewage while attempting to evade the light. Eventually disappeared into the darkness. be nearing the trapdoor now. The walk felt longer this time, but you didn't worry. Soon you see the faint orange light shining from the lighthouse above. Another few minutes of walking got by, then 10 minutes, then 30, and an hour. It wasn't until the low battery message on your phone displayed it until you began to panic. You were certain that you hadn't deviated in the straight path that had led you to the well. You hadn't dared turn the corner or explore any of the other paths. May as well call her. You had been too much of a coward to do so initially, but now you didn't care. You hit dial just as your screen fades to black. Your phone's battery sputters and dies. True panic sunk its teeth into you. Your mobile phone was your lifeline. It wasn't just that, it was the only way of seeing anything in this maze. So, as you calmed yourself, your eyes were forced to adapt, granting you just enough vision to see what was in front of you. There was no point continuing forward. It's best to turn back and find another way out. You fumbled backwards, using your hand as an indicator of how far away the wall was to your left. A sticky substance occasionally made contact with your fingertips. You shudder, knowing you'll need a hot bath after this. After a few minutes of careful navigation, you reach a series of junctions once more, several paths leading to the village's toilets. You just have to face the embarrassment and call for help that way. There was no other solution to your head at this point. As you turn the corner and proceed down the new passageway, you realize what must have happened. She must have shut the trap door, moved the rug over it, and blown the light of the candle out. That's why you couldn't see your exit. It was just as dark as every other surface. Or she'd ventured in to find you. Highly unlikely. You never hear the end of this. Despite it being her fault that they argued, her fault that they were in this lonely village, her fault that they were bored out of your mind, her fault you were down here. No, that's not fair. Just stay calm and we'll be out of this cold sewer soon, you tell yourself. The walk began to lengthen and you felt like you were not approaching anybody's home anytime soon. Finally, you decided to backtrack again. Maybe this corner led out of town. Better not stray too far from the center. Stick to the junction, at least that was familiar. Again you reach the junction, this time tactically deciding which path to go down, gazing long and hard into each one. But all were black hollows of nothingness. None seemed the better choice. You stopped thinking for a moment and looked down at your feet. You didn't even realize you had stepped into the filthy liquid flowing through this accursed place. You could now actively feel the raw sewage mixture seeping through your boots, passing through your socks and soaking into your skin. Forget the hot bath. You need an entire decontamination team to clean this muck off. It's bound to happen at some point. So while silently cursing, you set off down a different branching hallway, determined to find a swift exit. Nothing. Again, nothing. You were walking for an hour in this direction, desperate to find anything, when into the darkness to notice any distinguishable feature other than those flat, curved walls. You didn't even need to use your hands to guide you now. You were storming ahead through the sewage and litter, so it felt like another hour. Your pace quickened to a medium jog. Your pulse is increasing. You feel like if you travel faster, you'll find an exit faster. The brain begins to turn on itself. You jog for 10 minutes, eventually sprinting down the corridor, sewage splashing everywhere as you run. You are now used to the smell. It is making you gag as you desperately want your oxygen replenished. Just as you thought you may have found something different, the floor gives way. You plunge into a 10-foot deep pool of raw sewage and wastewater. Your body doesn't know whether to take in a breath first or vomit up the vile liquid that entered your mouth and nose as you fell. You're already exhausted from running, but adrenaline gives you that desperate push you needed. You fight to surface. Your clothes now heavy in this pool of excrement and other bodily fluids. You fight to move to the side of the cistern, grabbing the slippery edge and failing to escape. Every attempt you make only submerges you once more. You vomit profusely as your body demands more oxygen. It is met with none. Instead, foul vapors worthy of hell's worth punishment are brought into your lungs. One last desperate plea before you begin to drown, you propel yourself with all your might upwards and onto the edge of the cistern. You curl in on yourself and retch until your stomach screams, vomiting continuously onto your side. A pool of various liquids forming by your head does not faze you, as long as it's not inside your body anymore. Even after what felt like hours of aggressive spasms from your insides, you do not stand. You wait. You wait until the room stops spinning. You wait until the pain of breathing disappears. Mercilessly, this nightmare would not allow you to escape that easily. Finally, you wake, the horror beginning anew once more, but only the desperation fills your stomach now. It took what felt like another hour, but you were on your feet, staggering in the first direction you saw in front of you. You didn't recognize any of the features of those labyrinths now. You knew there had to be a way out. You dragged your soaked shoes across this filthy stone floor. You didn't get 10 feet before you had to retch again. Nothing came out. High-pitched ringing would not leave your ears alone. You soldier forward. You turn a corner. You walk in a straight line. You turn another corner. A rat runs over your shoes. You turn another corner. You walk in a straight line for eternity. Somehow you find some stairs. You decide to take a break on them for a moment. You search for your phone. It was gone from your pocket. Taking a big intake of air, you realized that you had become so used to the ghastly vapors of the sewer, it was making you salivate. Down the stairs you went, determined to reach the surface. Whether it was fatigue or the slippery, disgusting steps, you slipped and fell forward, ending on your knees. The skin was torn and now raw, soaked with the thick brown liquid contained in the puddles on the floor. Determination lifted you from your praying. There was no salvation here. You continued down the stairs. You continued walking until your feeling in your wet legs was lost. The way out must be deeper. You had never seen these stairs before. It was new. Corridor after corridor, corner after corner, the long night strings you along until you begin to slip away. You seek an escape, after all, by any means necessary, so you fight to be freed. You begin by clawing at the sewer grates, up to your waist in raw sewage. You tear at the pipes along the walls, the metal refusing to budge. You dislodge the black gooey bricks from the sewer walls. Wait. Since when had the walls been melting? There were pulsating veins running from the floor to the ceiling. You tore at them in frustration. You wanted to kill the beast. Maybe then your torment would end. You don't remember much after that. Wandering until the end of time would do that to someone. Now, with this incredibly tight metal coffin that once discharged human waste, you find yourself curled up. You feel warm. You feel free. You don't remember when you'd eaten your own clothes. You couldn't remember what had tried to take that large bite out of your arms, chest, and legs. You don't remember why there were those strong fibers stuck between your teeth. I mean, you couldn't even hang yourself on them or the rope. You had forgotten about the rats gnawing at your feet, the only part of you exposed from the pipe. The rats were even curled up next to you. They were warm too, or trying to be. Try to imagine where your glasses have gone. Oh, don't fool yourself. You lost your imagination and everything else up there a long time ago. So, this is it. You thought your exit was hidden in this tiny black pipe barely big enough for a human adult to fit into. Well, you were technically right. You die here, feral, hungry, cannibalized, diseased beyond belief. The last thought that floats around in the void that was once your mind was this. Where was she? The way of all flesh. The body of the tramp had lain in the cellar of the house on Burgundy Street for several weeks now. He had finally shuffled off the mortal coil less than 48 hours after having sought refuge from the chill London winter. A half-empty bottle of cider stood going to waste next to the body. It's never been his favorite tipple, but beggars could not be choosers, and, besides, he had drunk far worse in his time. Just about anything he could lay his hands on. Mess, petrol. He was on piss when he had been too weak to forage for anything better. His body expelled the final pocket of gas from his intestines where the remnants of a cold, fur-covered hamburger, discovered in the gutter not 100 yards from this, his final resting place, now dissolved into a sticky black nothing in a pool of digestive juice. Who he was and where he'd come from were questions that he could not have answered, even if anyone had taken the trouble to ask. What meager existence had passed for his life had long since become obscured in an impenetrable haze of alcohols. The tramp's death had been as inconsequential an event to the world as large as his life had been. But in the midst of death there is life, and this was no exception. The tramp had carried with him his own personal menagerie of fleas, ticks, lice, and mites for as long as he could remember. Over the course of the years, they had all become a part of his life. To such a time, even the continual circle of itching and scratching had become as natural to him as blinking and breathing. The microscopic creatures clung to his flesh, drank his blood, shared his life until it had run out. Now the tramp was dead, but his menagerie had not deserted him. They clung to the body he had bequeathed them, his sole earthly possession. As the days in the cellar passed, the menagerie were joined by tiny worms, the larvae of blowflies, all attracted by the enticing stench of putrefying flesh, the stale aroma of vomit on the tramp's chest, and the shit in his pants. It was a parasitic utopia. With nothing to do but ingest and inbreed, the invertebrate community, for it was a community they had become, wanted more. Their biting, sucking mouth parts and huge, distended stomachs slivered and ached for tastier morsels than the decaying flesh their home could offer. Intelligence was not the correct word to describe what was beginning to develop among them. It was more of an intuition, a sense of a world that existed beyond the shadowy confines of the cellar, a world of endless possibilities, if only it were within easy reach. Then they would go, all of them, but their tiny gripping claws were designed for that purpose only. Major locomotion had not been part of the package. The flea stood the best chance of traveling the distances involved, but the community consciousness demanded one for all and all for one. No one was going anywhere without the others. And so it remained. The tiny clawed limbs clung precariously to the ever-diminishing body of their dead host. Some mechanism to transport them out into the brave new world was all they needed, but such things were out of their hands. There was nothing they could do about it, so they waited. While they waited, they continued evolving, perfecting, fucking themselves into new forms of life. The community grew. Praying had never entered their tiny minds, but whatever was divine intervention or just blind chance, their salvation was delivered from above. All 400 pounds of Edward Peterson came crashing down through the rotten floorboards as they gave way beneath his substantial bulk. Eddie, as he'd always hoped people would call him, hit the floor of the cellar and lay still. Everything went quiet as the dust swirled in the shafts of light from above, and gradually settled. That was good. He got up and followed. Breath labored in the huge chest, and blood dribbled from his lips. The skin of Eddie's left cheek hung in a limp flap beneath the empty socket from which his eye had been gouged. He had meant to keep hold of it, try to put it back in place later when things were quiet, but in the rushing and confusion he had dropped it in the street. They had done a good job on him. Almost. But Eddie had still managed to escape them. 20, perhaps 30 against one, but he had still been able to summon up the strength from somewhere within himself to claw his way free of the mob, drag himself away, and then, despite his certainly fatal wounds, outrun them. All of his training had been worth the effort. It hurt all the time, but he had been driving himself on, and it had paid off. There had to be more dignity in dying here, even in the cellar of an old, ruined house, letting life slip away from him in his own sweet time. It was just what it was, his own sweet time. Just to lay and remember. Replay his life one last time, his own private picture show. They had surprised him. That was obvious. How else could they have cornered him so easily? Up until the moment he had found himself confronted by the mob, Eddie had never really stopped to consider exactly the reaction of the public at large to his hobbying. To Eddie had always been something between him and the little ones. No one else. The makeup of the mob had surprised him even more. This was not some rampaging rabble of drunks and vagabonds like he saw in the movies. These had been real people. Men, women, old, young. There had even been a young girl, no more than 8 or 9, just the age that Eddie liked them. That had been what caused the hesitation, enough to give them the chance they needed to grab him. He really had stirred up something in this sleepy little community. Average, ordinary people with their 9-to-5 jobs and 2.4 children, all baying for his blood like a pack of hounds. Eddie could not move, but that was all right. All he wanted to do now was rest. The pictures of all those angry people began to fade in his head. If he had seen where he had run, they would have been here by now. But they had not followed. Eddie could take his time. Only a couple of bones had been broken by the fall. The mob had done the real damage. Claws of intestines slid almost gracefully from the hole in Eddie's stomach that had been gouged by the elderly woman wielding her broomstick like a fighting knife. Eddie could feel his stomach running away from him. He wanted to put up his hand to stop it, but he had fallen on top of one arm and the other had 3 fingers slipped from it. It would be useless, even if he could summon the strength to raise it. Eddie stared up at the jagged hole in the ceiling, and a tear came to his remaining eye. It was not pain that made Eddie Peterson cry. The pain of anything was the best part of it all. Not an inch of his flesh had escaped being punched, kicked, gouged, scratched, or torn away. His entire body was a mess of screaming nerve endings, each one sending messages to the pain receptors in his brain. screaming so loud that Eddie could not differentiate between them. For the first and possibly last time in his life, Eddie Peterson was truly in touch with every part of his body, and it felt electric. But even such exalted sensations could not entirely block out the realization that this warm, shadowy cellar would be the last place on God's earth that he would know. Even though he had not died at their feet as they had wished, the damage Mob had inflicted upon him would ensure that Eddie Peterson would never again see the light of day. Another tear trickled down Eddie's cheek. There was a whole world teeming with the little ones that Eddie liked to call his own, their bodies waiting to satisfy him, their flesh to fill his stomach. All that and more. And here was Eddie Peterson, laying down alone in the dark. But Eddie was not alone. The Cellar community had been aware of Eddie's presence for quite a while before the first Brave Scouts had been sent forth to investigate this new, warm territory that had arrived on their doorstep. Eddie's left leg lay across what had once been the tramp's foot. That was the point of contact where the pilgrimage began. Had he not spent so much time dreaming of the little ones, Eddie may have been more aware of what was happening to him. He would not have seen the tramp's body even if it occurred to him to look for it. The light that penetrated the cellar was too faint to discern any detail. The pilgrimage began at night as 100,000 microscopic explorers made their way from the remains of the tramp to pastures new. As he touched Eddie's body, the itching began. The symphony of pain that had accompanied him since his arrival had begun to subside into a vague numbness. But now it exploded again as the desire to scratch away every last itch of flesh that remained made him want to scream. Screaming, however, was something Eddie could no longer do. His tongue flopped uselessly in his mouth, and all that escaped as sounds was him gurgling on his own blood and saliva. The procession of mites, fleas, bugs, and lice moved onwards and upwards. Eddie could not see the microscopic invaders, but he could feel every footfall, every searching proboscis as they ran over him. Fortress Eddie was soon overwhelmed. His already fading vision blurred as hundreds and thousands of microscopic mites converged on the tender flesh of his eyeball. Had Eddie had the benefit of a mirror, he would scarcely recognize himself among the huge, amorphous blob that rippled and writhed on the cellar floor. The itching became more and more intense until Eddie thought he could take it no more. Then it got worse, as if when some unheard command 100 million mouths began to feed. Eddie's body quivered, moved by the ferocity of the voracious horde. His mind, rapidly becoming as blubbery as his body had been, tried vainly to comprehend what was happening to him. The body that had carried him around for almost 30 years, and had kept him out of the clutches of those who would have gladly watched him burn in hell, was now being destroyed by tiny nothings that could sit 10,000 on the head of a pin. The feeding took a day and a night until all the flesh had been stripped clean from the skeleton. Eddie would have found some comfort even in that state. He had always maintained the taunts of his excessive physique. He really was big-boned. And that should have been the end of the things, at least as far as Eddie Peterson was concerned. But what puzzled Eddie the most was the fact that he could still puzzle at all. For a day and a night he had lain in the cellar and had slowly devoured what he could still see. Still here. If that were not the end of things, then what next? Eddie sat up, looked around. Perhaps he'd been dreaming. He raised his hands and stared at them, 4 fingers and a thumb on each, just as they'd always been. But what are the fingers that had been ripped away during his escape? Where are your fingers now, Eddie? Fingers that talked. Eddie liked that. He smiled and got slowly and steadily to his feet. He stood in the middle of the cellar, a thin beam of light shining down on him through a hole in the floorboards above. Eddie looked himself up and down. His body could not weigh 400 pounds now. It looked far too lean and muscular. That way no one will be able to catch us. Now his body was talking to him. Eddie raised his talking hands in front of his face. He flexed the fingers. They moved just as they always had, but the sensations were somehow different. We are different, Eddie. You are different now. How am I different? Eddie was taken aback. Who was he talking to? We are you now, Eddie, and you are us. So that was it. That was how his fingers spoke to him, but he felt so different. They were alive. Eddie touched his body. It felt the same all over. A body constructed from 1,000 million living organisms. Man replicated from 1 billion vertebrates, each cell a living creature. Why have you done this? We need each other, Eddie. We all need to leave this place, but we can't do it alone. Eddie strutted around the cellar, becoming accustomed to the weight of his new body. Does this mean I can go back to my life, to my little ones? Yes, Eddie, we all can. Eddie smiled. Will it be like before? He grinned eagerly. Not quite, but it will be good. We must all learn to adapt. Eddie frowned, unsure of what they meant. Then he felt down between his legs. The replica of a man was not as anatomically correct as Eddie would have liked. But that was the part I liked best. Don't worry, Eddie. You can teach us. We are all eager to learn. Eddie beamed. Friends at last to share his hobby with. Let's go, he said. The little ones are waiting. What happens at Dillerson Farm? In the world, there are locations that some may consider strange. Of course, there are typically haunted houses and old burial grounds that may or may not actually be supernatural, but none could truly comprehend the happenings of the Dillerson Farm. The Dillerson Farm was a place that even the bravest adventurers would not go. It's hard to call skeptics truly skeptic when they refuse to set foot on the place. The origins of the Dillerson Farm were not exactly known, but its history was enough to write a book. The first case would be from 1962. The Dillerson Farm would be inherited by John and Mabel Dillerson, along with their 4 children. John inherited the farm from his grandfather, Henry, who passed away of tuberculosis. John's grandfather would be described as a good man. He was a hard worker who cared about the farm as much as he cared about his family. For many decades, Henry lived on the farm, though it was never known if he owned the farm or if he inherited it himself. In Henry's final days, he was hysterical. In his hospital room, he would scream constantly about holes in the fields and hands rising from the ground. It was never known what he meant before he died. That is, until John inherited the farm. Neighbors were not as keen to these Dillersons as they were to Henry. John was described as a raging drunk. Mabel was a loud, bothersome woman. His 3 Dillerson sons were troublesome teens who would skip school and throw parties on the farm. The one Dillerson daughter was a sheltered and spoiled child. Police would be called to the Dillerson farm almost daily. From domestic abuse and noise complaints, there was nothing the Dillersons weren't notorious for. That is, until the night of May 16, 1963. At around midnight, neighbors heard Mabel Dillerson screaming and shouting from the fields. She was naked and red in the face. She seemed unspeakably hysterical about something. The situation quickly turned grim when it was discovered why she was behaving this way. A few days before, Mabel's beloved cat, Whiskey, had gone missing. Mabel speculated that perhaps John had something to do with it. It wasn't until that night that Mabel was taking a late-night shower that she heard faint meows from the bathroom window. She didn't even put any clothes on before she went outside. That's when she was met with a grisly sight. Mabel discovered Whiskey, but he'd been completely skinned. It was not like his fur had been shaved. Whiskey's skin was completely gone. It was like he had been cleanly peeled. The worst part was that the poor thing was still alive. Seeing this, Mabel went into an absolute meltdown. She began screaming naked into the night, blaming John. Mabel spent that night in police custody for her own protection. John got his rifle and put the poor feline out of its misery. Who would go through something so heinous? No animal person should ever have to go through something so horrendous. The next event would take place on February 2nd, 1964, at 10 p.m. Police were called to the Dillerson farm after gunshots were heard. When they arrived on the scene, Johnson was out in his backyard. He was an incoherent mess. He was screaming about the farm as well. He claimed to have witnessed each and every other Dillerson member get dragged into the well. He spoke of black, oily tendrils arise from the well and pull Mabel down. She'd gone out that night to check upon the chicken coops after she'd heard a ruckus. John was watching from the window. He jumped up and tried to alert the kids, but they were already gone. They weren't in their beds when he'd last seen them. The gunshots rang out after John proclaimed that they came back, but it wasn't them. He spoke of something in the well that took his family, then pretended to be them. The police assumed that John had suffered a mental breakdown, executed the other Dillerson members, and disposed of their bodies in the farm as well. John was later sentenced to a mental facility for the rest of his days. The rest of the Dillison members were never recovered, though attempts were made to recover them from the well. Though they tried, the authorities noted that the well never seemed to end. They proclaimed it was bottomless. It's not known how deep the well truly is, but this was an all too familiar situation for the neighbors of Dillison Farm. They recalled Henry's dying ramblings. Did his talk of something in the ground actually have weight? For almost 2 decades, the Dillison Farm would be a desolate mess of land. People around the area began to suspect that the Dillison Farm was cursed. The next event wouldn't take place until 1983. By this point, the Dillison Farm was practically in a state of abandoned disrepair. That was until the property would be purchased by Ed Smith Mining, a mining company that was mainly based in New York at the time. In late fall of that year, Ed Smith sent a 20-man crew to Dillison Farm in the hopes of harvesting the rich soil. While Dillison had its cursed reputation, the place would produce some of the best crops ever seen. By this point, most of the neighbors had moved away. Dillison was officially a desolate strip of land. 15 of the men vanished one November night during a 30-minute night break. The manager came back to find 15 of his staff gone and 4 incapacitated on the ground. The 4 that remained, none of them could accurately recall what happened. All that could be gathered is that the crew had heard strange noises coming from one of the freshly dug holes. One of the men went to investigate first, but he was gone for far too long. Eventually the worker came back, but he appeared strange. The worker seemed almost anxious in trying to convince the others to follow him to the hole. That's when the 4 remaining workers blocked out, only to awaken to 15 of their comrades missing. The missing 15 workers were never found, recovered, or heard from again. Ed Smith Mining filed for bankruptcy in 1990 after the families of the missing workers filed a lawsuit against the company. To this day, the Dillison Farm still remains, untouched and unexplored. That brings us to just a few months ago. I used to work for a team of paranormal investigators. For safety purposes, my name and my colleagues' names have been changed. Months prior, we'd been preparing for a 3-day camp and exploration of the Dillison Farm. If there truly was something cursed about the farm, we were going to find out. The day had finally come. The team for this exploration consisted of Dave, Ashley, Hector, Rob, and myself. Dave was the lead of the exploration as he had the most experience exploring paranormal locations. Ashley was roughly new to exploration, but she had an ambition that you just couldn't find anywhere else. Hector was the oldest of the group, joined the team in the hopes of something breaking his skepticism of the paranormal. Rob was a stern, hard-boiled guy, but he was cool as long as you stayed on his good side. We arrived in the farm right around dusk. The place was a dusty, old mess. Never thought I could describe a place as depressed, but this place was completely devoid of joy or life. The first thing Dave pointed out was the uncanny lack of sound. Nothing could be heard but the dry breeze and the dusty air. There were no birds, insects, or passing cars. It was just complete and utter silence. Not a single living creature had set foot on this land in years. The farm was just an abandoned purgatory, lost to time. Something feels off about this place, said Ashley. This place sure as hell gives me the creeps, that's for sure, said Hector. I was somewhat mesmerized by the place. I'd heard about the place, but I'd never set foot on the grounds before. Seeing it in person was far more intense than any tales could give off. Daylight is fading, people. Let's move, ordered Dave. He simply put what our mission was. We were to investigate the infamous well, the same one that was spoken of in the John Dillison case. Dave's plan was to attach a submersible camera to a thick wire and send it down the well. Our plan was to see if we could find what the police never could. If John Dillison's story had any kind of weight, then the bodies of the Dillison family may still be in that well, if they ever were there in the first place. While Dave, Hector, and Rob set up the line and the camera for the well, Ash and I investigated the farm and Dillison living quarters. The house had nothing interesting. The house, for the most part, had been completely emptied. The only thing that remained were a few old kitchen appliances. The barn was no different. The place was mostly empty other than left behind farm equipment. There was one thing that Ashley noted, though. There was a strange trail in the dirt that led from the barn to a filled-in hole by the outhouse. The trail looked fresh. Too fresh. What made it even creepier was that the trail didn't seem like it was made by a person. It was weird and disorganized. At some points the trail was serpentine. At other points it turned insect-like. I took a photo for the notes. I couldn't escape the unease of what could have caused that trail, though. It was now 8 p.m. The line was ready to go down. I set up tents and placed floodlights on the scene. This was going to be a long night. Hector loaded the camera on the brim of the well. On Dave's cue, the camera began to descend. We have vision, Ashley confirmed as the camera's point of view appeared on her laptop. It's too dark. Activate night vision, requested Dave. Ashley activated the night vision from her laptop as the camera continued to descend. There's nothing strange so far. All I can see were the walls of the well. Repeat that. There was nothing strange so far. All I can see were the walls of the well. We've now descended to 20 feet, said Ashley. The man-made stone walls of the well continued onward. It's a bit strange that the well goes down this deep. Stone walls, that is, I said. Dave looked at me like I sounded like an idiot. I probably did in his mind. We've descended to 40 feet, said Ashley. By this point, we were beginning to see the moisture against the walls. Something was a little off, though. There was a strange black ooze beginning to appear in patches. At first glance, one would assume it to be the mildew or sludge, but it slowly wriggled as the camera passed it. I would almost compare it to slugs. What is that? I asked. Probably just worms. It decomposes, you know. Maybe they've been eating something dead down there, said Rob semi-sarcastically. We've descended to 80 feet, said Ashley, confused. 80? What happened to 60? I asked. I don't know. The camera skipped the marker. It's just a glitch. Proceed, said Dave. Hector and Rob continued lowering the line. By this point, the walls had stopped being stone. The walls were just a combination of darkened mud and that weird black sludge. That's when the camera came to a sudden halt. Why did you guys stop? Asked Dave. We didn't. I think we hit something, said Rob. The camera didn't show anything, though. We're still looking at the same murky sludge. That's when the camera began to short out. The signal began to go in and out. For a split second, the screen changed to something else. Ashley, pause the live feed and play that back, said Dave. Ashley did so, and surely enough, something showed up for a millisecond. Ashley took a few tries before she was successfully able to pause on the image. It was a black screen with a few simple words. What are you looking for? Seeing this made everybody pause. Well, that's freaky, said Hector. What do you do about that? Asked Rob. This is just an interference. Silent interruptions. Keep going. This has nothing to do with us, said Dave. Dave was thoroughly creeped out. I could see it all over his face. After a bit of wrestling with the wire, the camera began to descend again. We've descended 280 feet, said Ashley through a shaky voice. For the first time through the entire descent, the camera's audio detected something. It started as a slight noise, but the lower we went, the louder it became. Soon we could vividly hear what it was. It was the painful meows of a cat. The sound was clearly a cat, but it sounded warped and distorted. The only way I could describe it was as if something that wasn't a cat was trying desperately to sound like one. Through it all, we went lower and lower. Eventually, the meowing began to sound less animalistic and more human-like. The cries of a cat began to sound like the cries of a person. Several people. The voices screamed in unison. By this point, Ashley was ready to get the hell out of there. I was as well. Rob tried his best to stay composed, but I can tell he was on the verge of freaking out. The night vision wasn't even seeing anything anymore. It was just darkness. The screen began to display words and phrases. Mabel. Bobby. Sam. Frank. Joshua. Whiskey. They're a part of us now. You can be a part of us too. Behold. The camera's footage was cut out entirely. The camera remained off for several minutes. Suddenly, Hector and Rob yelled as the wire began to rapidly descend. Something was pulling the camera. It was pulling hard. Rob tried to grab the wire only for it to burn his hands. The wire reached its limit. The end of the wire was rooted into the ground and finally popped out and went straight down the well. No, the camera! Yelled Dave. The footage of the camera returned. The camera depth displayed as 340. The camera appeared to be somewhere else. We could see stalagmites, water, and even more of that black sludge. When we picked up the camera just out of view and held it there for a few seconds, the screen displayed a final set of messages. Dave, Ashley, Rob, Hector, Mark, don't be afraid. We can keep you safe. Down here. The camera turned to reveal what was holding it. What we saw made us all visibly pale. A grotesque amalgamation looked into the camera. We could see what appeared to be a combination of 3 women, 4 men, a cat, and a few other creatures. All of them were covered in a coating of black fluid. In unison, they smiled into the camera. The camera went offline for good. Suddenly, we began to hear something rapidly climbing up the well. All of us ran to the van as quickly as possible. We had no regard for our belongings or each other. All of us jumped into the vehicle and stepped on the gas like there was no tomorrow. In the rearview mirror, we can see a disgusting mass chasing us on thin, insect-like legs. The entire ride was silent. All of us were lost in our own shock. We just discovered something horrifying at Diligent Farm. All the evidence had just been abandoned there. When something like that happens, you don't think about evidence or conspiracy. All that's on your mind is survival. I gave up on paranormal investigation after that. I think all of us did. I never heard from any of them again. I assume they all just went out and got normal jobs. I never saw or heard mention of Diligent Farm ever again. Truth be told, I don't think I want to know anything about it. If it were up to me, I'd tell the military to go in there and burn the place to ashes. There are some things in this world that human eyes were not meant to understand. What was in that well? Whatever became of it? I made several theories on what it could have been. First thought that there's some body-snatching aliens living on a Diligent Farm. My other theory was that the well may have been some sort of portal to hell. I don't think I'll ever truly know what it was. However, I'll leave this off with a simple message. If you ever come across a place called Diligent Farm, stay the hell away from it. Diligent Farm is a place lost to time. It is a place that remains a desolate blind spot. Thanks for listening to these stories. Hopefully you'll be inspired by the nightmarish imagery to write your own stories to guarantee sleepless nights. If you want to learn more about writing something horrific, consider taking the Nightmare Fuel writing course from AutoCrit. It provides you with all the tools necessary to write a captivating horror from beginning to end, and registering for this class gives you a 30-day membership to the AutoCrit Pro platform, a $30 value, absolutely free. Just click on my link in the description. Or, if you're not a horror writer, AutoCrit provides services for writers in other genres. The link for that is in the description. Thank you, and have a great day.